had been on the point of having her prepared for an amputation, when Helena, who had only dropped in at the hospital to see another patient, had happened to walk through the unit and had been called over by him for a second opinion. As the hospital's senior microsurgeon, Helena had immediately taken charge, deciding it might be possible to save Annie's arm. Her face had been the first one Annie had seen when she had first regained consciousness, but it hadn't been for many, many weeks after that she had learned, not from Helena herself, but from one of the nurses, how lucky she was that Helena had had chance to be in the hospital when she had been brought in. It had been Helena who had spent hour after hour at her bedside talking to her whilst she lay in a coma, dragging her with the strength of her will and her love back to the world of the living, and Annie knew that she would never, never cease to revere and love her for all that she had done. "You aren't the only one who has gained," Helena often teased her gently. "You have no idea how much higher my professional stock has grown since it's become publicly known that my personal surgical procedure saved your arm. Your arm is worth more than its weight in gold to me, Annie." And then her face would soften as she'd add, far more tenderly, "And you, my dear, are more special to me than I can find the words to say. The daughter I never thought I would have." Both of them had cried a little the first time Helena had made this loving claim, the moment and the words especially meaningful to them both. Helena, the highly qualified and skilled surgeon who had lost her own womb and her chances of motherhood at a very young age, and Annie, the girl who had been abandoned as a baby and then grown up in a children's home, always treated well, but never loved in that special one-to-one way she had so often yearned for. 2 years ago, when Helena had finally accepted the proposal of marriage from her long-term partner, Bob Lever, Annie had been more pleased for both of them than she had been able to find the words to say. Previously, Helena had always refused to marry Bob, claiming that one day he might meet a woman who could give him the children she couldn't, and that when that day came she wanted him to feel free to go to her. And it had taken the combined efforts of both Annie and Bob to persuade her to think differently. In the end, it had been Annie's gentle reminder that since Helena had unofficially adopted her as her daughter, she no longer had any reason for refusing Bob's proposals. "Very well, I give in," Helena had laughed, waiting until they had finished toasting her acceptance of Bob's proposal, before adding, tongue-in-cheek, to Annie, "Of course you know what this means, don't you? As your mother, and at my time of life, Annie, I shall soon be urging you to find yourself a mate and produce some grandchildren for me." It had been after that, and relaxed by the excellence of the Christmas dinner she and Helena had cooked together, and the wine that had accompanied it, that Annie had been able to tell Helena the extraordinary intensity of the dreams she had been having. "When did they first start?" Helena had questioned her, immediately very professional. "Oh, I'm not sure. I think I must have been having them for a while before I actually knew I was," Annie had told her, shaking her head and laughing at her own confusing statement. "You see, when I did start to realise I was having them, they seemed so familiar, as though he had been part of my life for always. It was as though somehow I knew him." She had stopped speaking to frown and shake her head as she tried to grapple for the right words to describe the extraordinary complexity of the feelings within her dreams, to convey to her friend the reality of the man who featured in them. Now, though, as she headed for her wardrobe to remove the new dress she and Helena had bought especially for this occasion the previous month, she caught sight of her reflection and gave another small smile. She had been so lucky that her face hadn't been damaged at all in the accident. Small and heart-shaped, it still looked pretty much as it did in the few photographs she had of her childhood. Her hair was still the same blonde colour.